Hello and welcome to Teaching Your Child's First Course. This is Those Who Can Teach Their Children. It's all about what good teachers do and how they do it. This is the first module in the course, Why Do You Teach?
As a prerequisite to our course, it's important that you read the TYC guide. We've provided a free download link for you here.
In this module, we're going to define your goals, clarify your motives, and deal with conflict. So what are your motives for homeschooling? This may seem like a retroactive question if you're already in the midst of your homeschooling, but it is important to look at because it's going to clarify and edify our purpose. Socrates may have had this annoying line of questioning when he was teaching, but he makes a valid point. He says to know yourself. If we don't, the things in our world around us are going to define what our homeschooling is instead of us defining it ourselves. So let's take a moment. Let's write a few things down and answer some questions. Be brutally honest. And if you have a spouse who's willing to do it with you, great. If they don't want to share their answers, that's okay. We're not going to ask you to share them. We just want you to get your mind set around what those are. First, why do you want to teach? Second, what are your educational goals, both the short and the long term? So, did you not pause and do the written assignment there? Did you just want to keep the video going? Do you know why that is? Have you just been trained to devour information and not really confront the issues because you need to get through this? Maybe you're looking for our views to see what they are first before viewing your own. Don't just disregard yours. If you're nodding your head, though, you're like a lot of us, and it's okay. If you didn't do it, take the time now to go back, because we don't want you to treat us like any other of the many courses on the World Wide Web. We want you to take us on fully. We want you to fight with us, laugh at us. Improve yourself by encountering this course fully. We want to help you identify yourself and how you teach more clearly. You're going to get out what you put into this course. So if you didn't pause and write down your motives, go back and do it now. When we clarify our motives, this helps us to identify our strengths as a person and as a homeschooling teacher, as well as coping with our own shortcomings in teaching. So after you've figured out your goals, go back and look at them again. Now try to approach them from a bigger perspective. So in our beginnings, they weren't pleasant. It was really hard when we first started homeschooling. We were kind of confused. Nathan and I really wanted to kind of prove ourselves that this was a valid option, that we knew what we were doing. And so we kind of followed the school parallels, and it was really important to us. But then as time went on, we realized that this is hindering our true potential in teaching and preventing our children from understanding their true potential. To think about your learning style. Because if we discover what type of learner you are, then it's going to help you see how you reactively teach. So first we've defined our motives, right? Now we're going to define what type of learner we are. So in that first chapter of that free guide that you definitely got off the website, we asked you to identify yourself. Make sure you do that, because it's going to help you. The third thing we need to think about after we've clarified our motives and we've identified the type of learner that we are is to figure out what type of teaching we adhere to. So teachers typically fall into one of two categories. First, there's the sage on the stage. So this person, aside from having jazz hands, is a type of teacher who likes to have some formal authority. This is a demonstrator style, and it tends to focus on content and is teacher-centered. This means that the teacher feels responsible for providing and controlling the flow of content, material, and the student is responsible and expected to receive this content. Now there's the second form of teaching, which is the guide on the side. Now this type of teacher are the ones who prefer to take a delegator, facilitator role. They like to focus on activities. And this style emphasizes student-centered learning. Responsibility is placed on the student to take the initiative for the meeting, demands of various tasks. These are the type of teachers who will often give student choices on implementing complex learning projects and act as a consultative role. So, of course, you know what we're going to say. At TYC, it's good to use both of them because different situations are going to call for different styles of teaching. Figure out the situation and fluidly move between both. When we know what we really want our kids to learn, do I want to just follow essential knowledge and skills? That's EK and S. What does that mean? That you're following this kind of set standard set before your state, which a lot of people do initially, and that's fine, to look at them and to think about them. If we're looking at the essential knowledge and skills, we might find ourselves asking deeper questions about it. For example, if you were to look at historical people and you find yourself asking, are there more interesting people to teach about? For example, who gave Christopher Columbus his maps? There could be something to go on there. We could want to be implementing this successful family that we see in our homeschool group of friends or co-ops. Do you want to implement those techniques? Maybe you have some new or old curriculum. It's this self-imposed, it's a valid option to study this. And then ask yourself, what do you really want to teach? Have you thought about character? Have you thought about what it takes to have an avid lifelong learner? What about the ability to seek answers for themselves? Maybe the discipline that it takes to be a learner. Let's say, for example, that when you thought about why you want to teach, you said, my desire to teach is because I'm passionate about something, say art or history. You're going to have to learn to guard yourself against incoming hostility from unenthusiastic learners. You're going to start uttering these same grievances that thousands of teachers have said. Those ungrateful whippersnappers aren't worthy of Shakespeare, Lincoln, quadratic expressions. We got to ask ourselves, how do we guard against our fragile egos when our enthusiasm is not infectious? Typical reactions to this particular frustration. The first one we've put up, which is getting through it as quickly as possible. By teaching in any way, going ahead and forging quickly as possible, what does that do to your future and present learning? You could buckle down and be fully determined to find a way to get your kids excited. What happens on the days that you can't? The third reaction is to just skip it. And that's a valid option a couple of times, sure. But what happens if it's something that they have to learn, a necessary component of something? Does this teach persistence, or do we lose the exercise of learning? So you got to count on the conflict. As a homeschooling parent, you are probably already used to conflict, and with certainly you know that you're going to experience it on any given day, any given subject, or any given week or year. There are 3 helpful ways of combating conflict. That is, that you're not always going to be able to inspire or have obedience or discipline from your kids. When you finish all of this course, you're going to find ways to make your lessons inspired and doing your groundwork. However, you're still going to experience conflict. If we've made the assumptions that your lessons start out inspired, that you've done your groundwork in activating all the brain areas, the learning styles, and the classroom management, and don't worry, we're going to cover those all the way to the end, they may still be bored to tears and apathetic to your wiles after all the aforementioned assumptions. Before you go begging the Holy Lord why, we're going to give you 3 methods to abate the lack of enthusiasm. First, you're going to change your delivery method. Well, what does that mean? That you may want to approach with a new learning style. So say, for example, you're teaching in one particular style, and then you reach that boredom or that unenthusiasm. Try something new, a different way of presenting the material. Your go-to learning style should be the kinesthetic movement. Your example here is like if you were teaching punctuation and reading. Your second way to combat boredom is to integrate this boring subject into one of the more interesting subjects. And by interesting, I mean what your kiddo thinks is interesting. So here you're going to have to think about what they like and how you can weave the detested subject into it. You might have arcs and angles that you're studying in geometry. So try building a trebuchet and shooting it studying the angles of those arcs. Building and shooting is far more interesting than a worksheet. When we're shooting a trebuchet, we see the counterweights and the effect it has there, and what kind of arcs it could present, depending on where our target may be. You've already exhausted all of your resources. Ask yourself at this point, is it important? Let's say, for example, that you're studying Lewis and Clark, and you have a princess daughter or a quiet son who could just care less about what you're teaching. Here you got to ask yourself, what is my goal in teaching? So go to your bare basics of your objectives. Take one of these two options here. You can either teach the basics and move on, or figure out the basics and how to apply it into something that they actually are interested. What does that look like? Well, let's take it each different child at a time. So you have the princess daughter who's learning about Lewis and Clark, an arduous walk. And you tell her a tale of how Sacagawe's life was, and that she could track and find and navigate her way through all situations, but still remaining very feminine. Or let's take your quiet boy studying Lewis and Clark, and he could care less about it. Well, Lewis and Clark were two very different people. Research these differences. See how they could possibly relate to your son. Teach him and show him how it relates to his likes and interests. For example, think about, does he like video games? Is he detail-oriented? And then sometimes remember that after everything you've done and all the fireworks that you've created, they might just still be bored. And there's nothing wrong with boredom. Sometimes just have to go through the exercise of learning. We have a child who is not in love with algebra. It is the least favorite thing, and no matter how much we put effort into making it interesting, hated relationship with it. It breaks her math heart to pieces. But that's okay. She's got to go through the exercise of learning, because that is instilling a discipline, and if you'll recall back at our characters, that's something that we definitely want to instill. A few things to keep in mind before we move on. Great days, great homeschools, and great children don't just happen. It requires daily focused work that offers more intrinsic than extrinsic rewards. The mandate for teaching children doesn't end at 14 and 15, although sometimes we want it to. This is the time when our kids need us the most. Now, they may seem like they don't want you around, but you need to be at the top of your game, because this is where the memories are made and the final disciplines for life outside of your home take place. Learning character, virtue, and wisdom is more important than any subject matter you'll cover. We don't want just good children who are brilliant. We want them to have good character. Remember, less is more. Subjects that you can do well, and the rest is going to fall into place. Nathan and I learned this after spending several $100s on this beautiful curriculum that was to last 4 years. In the very first year of it, we got stuck at the 3rd month. The kids were enthralled with ancient China, and we couldn't move past it. Folks, we stayed on it for 2 years. 2 years. That's a long time. But we really didn't want to say, what you want to learn right now isn't important, because we have boxes to tick and curriculum to finish. We realized this important lesson that what they're interested in, everything revolves around that, and it's going to teach everything that they need to know. Now, we may not have covered what we should have that year as far as what we hoped to have covered, but they remember everything that we taught them about ancient China, and it has been numerous years since then, and they still remember all the fine little details. If we had stopped and moved on, would they have remembered it all? The last thing I want you guys to think about is that success is never final and failure is never fatal. You may be a success in the morning and a failure in the evening. That's okay. Keep going. Keep your head up. So what did we cover in this module? We defined your educational goals. We clarified your educational motives and your mission. We identified what you want your kids to learn. We hope that we made you aware of the less obvious traps and pitfalls of homeschooling, and we hope that we've taught you some ways in dealing with conflict. We thank you so much for joining us on this journey. And this concludes Why Do We Teach module. The next one to move on to is classroom management.